So we're gonna start with most underrated and then work our way down all the way down to the best role player. So Sean, I want to ask you, everyone on this roster, who do you think is the most underrated player on the team?
Yeah, there's two names that immediately come to mind, but I'm just going to go with the obvious one in my opinion, and that's Isaiah Stewart. For a lot of his career, people treated Isaiah Stewart like he was a bum, like he couldn't play basketball, like he didn't belong in the league or he didn't belong in this team. But the reality of it is, Isaiah Stewart is one of, if not perhaps the most impactful player on this team. When he plays well, he brings the team to a different level. There were actually stretches, this last season where he was shooting like just under 40% from the 3-point line and was one of the best 3-point shooting bigs, last season in general. And on top of that, I think, you look at, kind of what Isaiah Stewart's been asked to do versus what, his best role is. You would argue that Isaiah Stewart is probably at his best, at least right now, coming off the bench as your backup big, having those significant minutes. Whereas playing the four, although I think there's still some potential there. And I think in those 48 minutes, I think you can at least do a couple of them with him in that position. He's not a starting four, right? So I think to me, like, I know he's, garnered a lot of criticism, but even from his first year, his motor is just obvious. You talk to anyone, around the organization and they just gush over Isaiah Stewart as a leader and as a guy. And he would have legitimate trade value if he was available on the market today. So to me, at least to me, it's pretty obvious that it's Isaiah Stewart. I'm not sure where you were going to go. Another name that I think would be worthy to bring up is Tim Hardaway Jr. He was a
Hmm.
third leading scorer on a team that just made the finals, and I think people are writing him off way too quickly. So that's a couple names that come to mind for me.
Yeah, Ryan Boseman in the chat agreed with you. He thought Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contributions could be underrated. I actually have someone different. I'm glad we don't agree here. I'm glad that I don't have Isaiah Stewart here. I don't know how people are going to perceive this. Maybe I'm a little bit too high on him. Maybe it's the Italian bias. I have Simone Fontecchio actually,
I like
and
that
I'll
pick.
I'll explain why. I thought last season when we acquired him, he was a guy that I looked at. I'm like, that's the second best player on a 14 win team. Now, granted, it was a 14 win team. The roster construction last year was the roster construction, but I thought Simone Fontecchio showed not only myself, but maybe Pistons fans that were tuning in, each and every game, if they actually were. This is a guy that could be in the starting lineup, possibly, could average 15 points a game, really good 3-point shooter. Like him, just activity wise, defensively, he does some stuff that I do like. He's not a lockdown defender by any means, but I think he could possibly be kind of like a sneaky, like dark horse guy that could maybe be the third, maybe second leading scorer on this team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, especially like when this Pistons team went from being historically bad to being just normally bad towards the end of the season last year. Like a lot of their improvements came from, having Simone Fontecchio on the court. He was able to replicate a lot of the shooting and the scoring, that we got from a Bojan Bogdanovic, showed that there was more to his game than we saw even in Utah. And he was able to stay in front of guys as well. So I think, when you talk about guys who are set up to thrive this season, especially, I look at a guy like Simone because he can start if you need him to, but he can also come off the bench. And in my opinion, the fact that the load is no longer going to be solely on him to produce 3-point shooting, and now he can be another guy in the rotation, I just think it's going to make him even more effective.
Yeah, same here. I honestly think he's probably a player that maybe not every Piston fan is locked in talking about. I know a lot of Pistons fans are very locked in with just this the core four, and they should be. They're the future of this team. But
Role players aren't sexy, but
I know I'm
when
a
you're
sicko. I,
sickos
I
like
like
us, those are the players you fall in love with.
like I was just talking to someone, like they asked me my favorite Pistons role player, and I told them Ish Smith, and they damn near like fell off their chair laughing. I was like, "What?" Like I love Ish Smith, love them as a person, and
He
just love them
worked
as
his
a
butt off,
backup.
man. Every single night he came off the bench. His effort was never in question.
No, not at all, not at all. So this one's gonna get a little bit tougher, Sean.
Yep.
It's
This
the
is when the heat
most
cranks up.
Yeah, we're turning up the heat. So the next square on this chart is the most overrated Piston. So I'll let you tiptoe around it. Who is the most overrated player on this team?
Yeah, so I'll preface this with saying that I don't think this player, like most overrated to me, doesn't mean that they're bad. This doesn't mean that I think that the hype, isn't justified. What I will say though is I think people talk about Jaden Ivey as a player that he isn't quite shown to be yet. I do think that, especially you look at the situation that he was put in last year, and Monty did fail him, especially at the beginning of the year. I don't think there's any disputing that. However, he did also play a lot of basketball after that first 20 plus games where he came off the bench. And he did have stretches where he shot the ball really well. And then he had stretches where he couldn't hit the broader side of a barn. Right. And so that's really the thing with Jaden Ivey is the consistency. And a lot of people talk about him like he's John Morant, but the real difference between him and John Morant is John Morant doesn't turn the ball over as much, and John Morant finishes at the rim. And Jaden Ivey hasn't really done either of those things on a consistent level yet. Now, I believe he can, and I think his ceiling is super high, and I'm a big believer in Jaden Ivey. So this isn't me saying that I don't believe in his upside. I don't believe that he can get close to being that type of player. But I do think that there has to be a little bit more of an honest conversation about who Jaden Ivey actually is as a player versus what the fans perceive him to be. Because, I don't think it's a guarantee that he is the second ranking player in that core four, so to speak. I think Asar Thompson brings a ton to the table. I think Jalen Duren has an immensely high upside. I think even Ron Holland, we don't know what he can be. And if his upside is what we think it can be, he'd be a damn good NBA player too. So I just think those are important things to consider, especially if he doesn't develop on the defensive side of the ball. Because if you're talking about the Pistons developing to their identity, that's going to be the most important thing. And he's definitely been below average thus far on that end. Again, this is not me saying I am not a fan of Jaden Ivey. I respect him a lot as a person. I believe in his potential. But the way fans talk about him, he has to fit that bill to me.
So I initially had Tim Hardaway Jr. here.
Mhm.
But I was kind of a cop out. I actually just kind of put like a blank face because I had such a
Oh, you can't make me step out on the limb and do something like that and then just put a blank face. Come on. I need boos in the chat. That is weak. Boo this man.
honestly, like I'll just say Tim Hardaway Jr. Now I know it's kind of it's unfair to him because he just got here.
Mhm.
And maybe Pistons fans aren't familiar with their game. Maybe they're not Michigan fans. Maybe they didn't get to see him play in college. But I kind of think when you look at him as a player, I've seen people say, like, what is he going to do here? Like, he was out of the rotation in Dallas, which, I mean, if you want to have that take, I think the writing was kind of on the wall when you have two elite guards like Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Probably not a whole lot of room for Tim Hardaway Jr. in the starting lineup. My only thing is, like, he's not a player where I think he's going to come in and average like a steady 20 points a game. Like, he might get you 12, maybe 14 if we're lucky.
Mhm.
But it's just a consistency thing with him. Like, I'm expecting him to have his ups, have his downs, and the ups are going to be all-time high. There's going to be games this year where guy has 30 points and he just can't miss from three. But there's going to be lows where there'll be games where maybe he's just like 0 for 7, has like 5 points, and people are like, wow, why did we trade for that? Like, what the hell? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's the type of thing when you ask most overrated, that would be my answer.